Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's tutorial video. Today I'm going to run through the steps and everything that I've taken to draw this lovely wolf using coloured pencils. So this was the first time that I've ever drawn a wolf and it was a really nice subject to work upon and I really enjoyed this one. Before we get into the tutorial though, if you want to follow this tutorial along in real time, there is a full 6.5 hour tutorial available over on my Patreon and also on my website. So if you subscribe up to Patreon on my website, you gain access to a whole host of tutorials. I've posted over 100 videos. That's a whole load of hours worth of tutorial content for you guys. So if you want to follow this along in real time and get access to all of those other tutorials, then head on over to my Patreon page or my website. The link is in the description below and I'll leave the links in a card up above for you guys as well. As always, all the materials that I've used throughout this tutorial are listed in the description below with affiliate links of where you can buy them should you wish to purchase the same materials that I'm using. So let's get straight into this wolf tutorial. So the first thing that I started with was the eyes, and I always like to start with the eyes because I think it gives this subject a soul. I really like to work on something that has a little bit of character, so that's why I always do the eyes first. Now the eyes on this piece weren't particularly big, so I couldn't get that many details in, and wolves tend to have quite small eyes anyway, so it's not like drawing a tiger or something that's got big wide eyes with loads of details. This wolf and this reference picture had quite small eyes. There wasn't really much detail in there, so the eyes were really simple for me. So all I did was just outlined the eyes with a dark sepia pencil. I made sure that I had that really sharp point, and I just outlined the eye, I outlined the pupil and everything, got all of that in, got the shapes correct and everything using a light pressure, and then I went in with harder pressure and outlined all of that sort of tear duct area. You've got that dark area around the iris, the coloured part, and I just went in with hard pressure, outlined and got everything down, and then I went in and did the iris. So for the iris I used a mixture of light yellow ochre from the Polychromos and the olive green yellowish, and I also used some darker brown colours to tone that up. So around the very edges of the iris where the iris meets that really dark part, the tear duct area, I added some shadows with some walnut brown, some burnt sienna, some nougat, all of those lovely sort of earthy brown tones I added around the edges there. And also along the upper eyelid you've got some shadows in there, so I just added those browny earthy tones to that as well. I also added some brown to the pupil to give it a little bit more depth, and I just blended out a few of those lighter brown tones around the pupil to really blend it into that yellow area in the eye as well. I then went ahead and did the other eye. So the opposite eye on the right hand side was a lot more green in colour. It was also reflecting a lot more light. So instead of using a lot of yellows and oranges and all those brown tones, I went just in with the olive green yellowish and I burnished that out, made it a lot lighter by using the Caran d'Ache Luminance white pencil. So I burnished and just made it a little bit lighter with that pencil. So the eyes were really simple. The main focus of this portrait was all of that lovely fur. So the fur obviously took a lot of work, and to begin with I just added in this sort of area around the eyes, so I made it look like, kind of like he was wearing some kind of mask. So I just added in that little area between the eyes and just around the eyes just to sort of give it some character. Like I said in the beginning, I like to do the eyes and everything first to just give character to the piece. So I added in that area first, and to do that all I did was just put down some base layers. I used some warm grey one and some cold grey one, and I like to mix the warm and cool colours because I feel like it gives the overall piece a really nice tone by mixing those together. So what I did first was lay down the warm grey one and then went over with a cold grey one. And when I'm going in with those base layers, what I'm doing is using really light pressure. I'm using a sharp pencil and I'm working in the direction that the fur is going in. So around the eyes you've got the fur that comes up over the top eyelid, it comes towards the left hand side of the face, and it comes in like an upward and then a long direction, and underneath the eye it goes in the opposite direction, so it goes down and then along towards the left. So I added the fur in the correct direction according to the reference photo, and it's really important that you pay attention to that reference photo and that you pay attention to that fur direction to enable you to get a realistic look. So I just layered those down really lightly following that fur direction, and then I went over with some dark sepia, some walnut brown and all of those sort of earthy brown tones, so the nougat, burnt sienna, all those kind of colours, I added into the fur. So to create that sort of speckled look, which you can see in the middle of the eyes, I actually went in with really short strokes of the dark sepia. I made really tiny lines going in the direction of the fur. So in the middle of the eyes, the fur's kind of going up towards the ears, so I made really small lines going up towards the ear. And it's really important that you make smaller lines where you've got that shorter fur. So in the completed piece, obviously all the longer fur is on the neck and around the ears and sort of on the cheeks, and the shorter fur is on the face. So I had to make sure that I used smaller strokes on the face compared to the longer strokes which I used on the neck. If I was to use longer strokes on the face, it would make the face look really long and really fluffy, and that's not the look that this reference photo had, and it's not the look that a dog or a wolf has either. It has quite short fur on the face, and then it gets longer towards the ear and the neck and the body. So when you're drawing wolves or dogs or anything like this, you need to make sure that you use smaller strokes where you've got that shorter fur, otherwise you're going to get a really hairy, really sort of fluffy look, and that's something that you really want to avoid. So the next part which I did after I did those eyes, naturally, was the neck. And the reason that I went to the neck was purely because if I was to continue with the face and then work to the neck, I would end up smudging a lot of the drawing with my hand. So I always like to work from left to right because I'm right-handed. So if I work from left to right, then I avoid smudging, especially if I've got those really dark colours, because if you put those dark colours down onto the white of your paper, it's quite hard to erase it afterwards. So to minimise smudging, I went over to the neck and filled in all of that lovely long fur on the neck there. So as I said, the fur on the neck required a different kind of pencil mark. So I made longer strokes with my pencils when I was adding in all of the fur details. So to add this fur down, what I did was went in with a base layer, again, of the warm grey one and the cold grey one, and I worked in the direction that that fur is going in. So on the top of the neck, it was kind of coming in an upward direction, and then as I worked around to the bottom of the neck, it sort of came down towards where the legs were standing on the wolf. So I made sure that I followed the reference photo and followed that fur direction. Once I'd got those base layers down, I then went in with a further layer of the cold grey one and just sort of mapped out all of the darker areas within the fur. So along the very back of the wolf, there's these dark marks, and then you've got the dark marks where the neck fur sort of overlaps some of the body fur, sort of as if it was sort of had rolls underneath the fur there. So I kind of added a dark line and some dark areas going around that sort of neck area, and also around the ears as well. There's a little bit of dark around there. So I mapped those areas out with a secondary layer of the cold grey one, and then I went in and just added a very light layer of the dark sepia as well. So I just used light pressure, again working in the same kind of way as I was using for the base layers, just using light pressure, a sharp pencil, and just working in the direction of the fur, just adding in a really light layer again, just to sort of map in all of those really dark areas. I then went in and added some Delft blue along the very back of the wolf because there was quite a blue kind of tone, like a cold tone shining down onto the wolf. So I went in with some Delft blue along there, and that also gave that dark sepia colour that I was going to add over the top. It gave it a really nice tone and it gave it some extra depth, and I found that when I actually started to add more fur on this, it really came to life just because I'd added that Delft blue in there, just because I've added that extra layer of colour. So it just gave the fur all the more interest. It complemented it really well. So I went in with a light layer of Delft blue, again working in the same way that I had with those base layers, just using some shading back and forth, working in the direction of the fur. I then went in and used a really sharp dark sepia pencil and started to add in all of those really detailed fur lines. So to create this long fur, what I did was, in my head I envisioned that I was touching the wolf. So I imagined that I was running my fingers through the fur, and I imagined what that would feel like. And I applied what that felt like through my pencil. So this might seem a little bit weird, but this is the kind of thing that I do when I'm drawing my portraits. I find that it really helps me to get an idea of the texture, and I find that by visualizing that texture and then applying it to my pencil, it comes out really well. And I don't know if anybody else does this or if it's just a weird thing that I do, but I find that it just really helps me, and just by visualizing that long fur, I applied really long silky strokes through my pencil onto that fur so that it looked really long and luscious and fluffy. And I just made really long motions with my pencil, very lightly to begin with, just to sort of get the texture in very lightly. And then I went in with some harder pressure on my pencil, again just using those long strokes of the pencil, flicking them at the end so they were really nice and soft, and so that it blends into the rest of the fur as well. To create that sort of salt and pepper texture where you've got that really light fur but you've also got some dark bits in there, all I did was just went over with the dark sepia pencil using those long strokes. I just went in and just added a few in there. So to create that sort of salt and pepper, you need to sort of sparsely add your fur strokes. So you want to add some dark fur and some interest so you've got that texture, but you don't want to cluster your strokes so close together that it becomes a really dark area. So you need to really separate your fur strokes. You need to just give them a little bit of room. You can overlap them as well to give it a little bit more texture and everything. But for the main part, for those really white areas that you can see on the neck, there are some dark sepia lines, but they're more spread apart than the darker areas on the neck there. So you can see that really white area at the top of the back. There's some long dark sepia strokes in there, but where you've got those darker areas, there are more concentrated strokes, if that makes sense. So in the lighter areas, they're sparse. In the darker areas, there are more strokes concentrated together to create that really, really dark tone. So then I carried on and went to the legs, so the top of the legs, and to add that sort of browny tone, I went in with some nougat, some burnt sienna, some walnut brown. I just layered those in exactly the same way as I was layering with that dark sepia pencil to create that fur texture. So I was creating really quite long fur strokes and just layering them on top of one another and clustering them together where you've got those darker sections. I didn't make the fur strokes on the legs and the underneath of the neck as long as what was going on the top of the neck, because I didn't want it to look completely fluffy. The reference that I was using, the body was kind of a shorter fur, kind of similar to the face, so I wanted to keep the strokes a little bit shorter on the underside of the neck and the body as well, compared to what was going on like on the side of the face and the top of the neck around the ears. So that bit was really fluffy, so that's where I concentrated a lot of the really longer strokes there. And on the body and the face, they were a lot shorter. So then I moved on to the ears once I'd completed all of that lovely neck fur, and the ears were a kind of interesting area because you've got this really dark area in the middle of the ear, and then you've got all this lovely white fluff around that. So to start that, all I did was just went around the ear and just added in all of those sort of gingery areas. So to create that ginger texture that you can see throughout the wolf and on that ear, I actually went in with some burnt ochre from the polychromos and some burnt sienna as well to create that really nice sort of gingery, sort of creamy tone. I added that around the outside of the ear and then obviously accented it with all of those dark parts. And to create that really dark bit in the middle, I didn't add any base colours down on that, so I went straight in with the dark sepia on that. And the reason that I did that was because I wanted to create a really nice dark tone, and if I was to add base colours and base layers underneath that, then I would get a kind of lighter tone, and I was trying to avoid using as much black as possible, so I just went straight onto the white of the paper with that dark sepia pencil, and I got that really dark tone that you can see in the middle of the ear there. And to create that white fluffiness that you can see going around that dark area, all I did was just brought the pencil back into that white area. So I started at that dark area and brought the pencil into the white area and sort of segmented the fur and just created some really soft lines just to kind of create the illusion that the fur was overlapping that dark area. I could have gone in and added some white over the top of the black, but it wouldn't have had the same effect and it would have looked really kind of unnatural and a bit contrived. So the way that I did that ear was just to work from the black into the white. And I found that it gave a really nice effect, and it gave a really sort of fluffy effect as well. Also in that ear, I used a little bit of a circular motion to kind of create that sort of fluffy, sort of messy, tangled kind of look that was going on in there. So all I did was just use circular motions with my pencil, using a sharp pencil, and it created that sort of almost matted kind of look there. And I just worked that around that white fluff and underneath that sort of gingery area as well, and it gave this really nice effect. So after I'd completed that ear, I then went on to complete the rest of the neck and the cheek, and again you've got that really long fluffy fur, so I did exactly the same as what I did for the back of the wolf. I just made really long strokes with my pencil. I made it look really nice and fluffy by using long continuous strokes and not using short ones. If I was to use short strokes on that area, then it would look like short fur like on the face, and that wasn't what was going on with the reference. It had this really nice fluffy cheeks, so I used long strokes to mimic that long fluffy fur. The shading on the face was really quite easy to do, and especially underneath the neck as well, we've got that white fur. All I did to add that in was just add those two base layers with the warm grey one, cold grey one, and then I just went in really lightly with some nougat, some walnut brown, just use a really light pressure on my pencil, sharp pencil as well, to really get those details in. To shade some of those areas, I actually used my pencil right on the side and used the side of the lead to actually shade that paper down, and you can get a really nice coverage like that. You can get a really soft cover as well. I then went in and burnished a little bit and blended everything out with the white pencil, especially in those areas where the fur looked a little fluffier. So through a lot of this portrait, I haven't actually gone through and burnished because a lot of the fur kind of looks a little bit coarse and a little bit wiry. If I was to go in and blend with the white pencil, it would make everything look too soft and too silky, and that wasn't the look that was going on in this wolf. The fur was really quite coarse, so instead of going in and blending with anything, I just left the pencil strokes as they were, so they were kind of rough looking and coarse like the actual fur on the wolf. For the top of the head, where you've got all this sort of more salt and peppery kind of fur, I applied exactly the same technique as what I did through the back. I added the base layer down, and then I went in and I sparsely added some little tiny strokes of the dark sepia pencil. So we're working back on the face again now, so I went in and used those smaller pencil strokes. I used really short lines rather than the long lines to create that short fur. As we came up towards the ears, the fur kind of got a little bit longer again, so I graduated my pencil strokes and made them longer as I was working towards the ears to create that long fur and to create the illusion that the short fur was really transitioning into that long fur. So I went from short pencil strokes to creating sort of medium to long size pencil strokes as I worked my way up towards the ears on the face. So for a lot of the shading on the face, you can see that it's quite dark, but there's also a lot of blues and purples in there. So what I did was just added those sparse dark sepia pencil marks to create that salt and pepper effect going on within the face. And then I lightly shaded using the side of my pencil some Delft blue and also some light red violet. So by adding some purple down there, it really complements that sort of orangey burnt ochre sort of gingery tone around the ears. So adding some light red violet, that purple tone next to that, really lifts it and gives it another level of colour, and it makes it really vibrant, and it really, your eye is really drawn to it. Just by adding that tiny little bit of red violet next to it, it creates a really different effect within the piece. So I added some light red violet next to those gingery areas, and I also added some light red violet around the face as well. And I added it into the face and a few other areas within the portrait to kind of tie it all together, so everything sort of had the same sort of tone, and there weren't areas where you sort of looked at it and thought, oh, that's a bit of purple there, that's not supposed to be there. So I tied that throughout the entire portrait. So where you can see some of the gingery areas on the wolf, mainly on the body and the back and around the ears, there is a tiny little bit of light red violet from the polychromos around there, and it just lifts that orange colour. It really makes it pop, and it creates a really nice lighting effect on the wolf as well. So we're coming towards the end of the portrait now. So for the light areas on the face, all I did was added those two base layers down, working in the direction of the fur as always. And all I did was just use the side of some of those sort of earthy brown tone pencils to create the shading on the face. So around the muzzle and the bottom of the neck, I just added some nougat, some burnt sienna, some walnut brown, using them really lightly on the side, so holding my pencil horizontal to my paper and just really lightly shading with a sharp pencil to try and get that colour down. I then went in with some dark sepia and some walnut brown, again with a sharp pencil, and added a few fur details on there. Again, keeping the pencil strokes quite short because we're working on the face and the face isn't really fluffy. On the bottom of the jaw, the face kind of bleeds into the neck where you've got that long fur, same as what was going on with the tops of the ears. So all I did was just graduated the length of my pencil strokes as I worked towards that neck fur where it's quite long again. For the nose, this was one of the really simple areas, and all I did was just mainly used the dark sepia pencil and some Delft blue and a little bit of white to create the whole of the nose here. All I did to begin with was just fill in the nostril really lightly with the dark sepia pencil, and I also just shaded in some of those darker areas as well. So you've got some darker areas around the outside, down the centre of the nose as well. I just shaded in some of those dark areas, mapped out all the shapes that I could see on the reference picture, and then added those to my actual drawing. And then all I did was just blended over with some white pencil to just blend all that in, use some Delft blue to add to the highlighted areas on the nose as well, and then just continued to build the Delft blue and the dark sepia, just layering lightly on top of one another until certain areas were as dark as they needed to be. And I applied that same technique to the gums and the teeth as well. So on the gums you can see there are some sort of really lighter areas, you've got some purpley areas, so I just applied exactly the same technique. I outlined all of the really dark areas with a sharp dark sepia pencil first, and then went in with a light layer and gently mapped them out until I was happy with the shapes. Then I went in and shaded some of the Delft blue and the light red violet around the gums where you had some light hitting them and it was a lot shinier. And then I just went over with the dark sepia, just shaded them down until I was happy with the tone of those. And then of course I added the whiskers, and to do that I just used a really sharp dark sepia pencil and made one continuous stroke over the portrait to create a really nice whisker. So when you're doing whiskers, you don't really want to stop and start your line, you want to create a nice fluid line, so try and make sure that you use one fluid stroke to create your whisker. Also, don't worry if it doesn't go completely to plan or in the right place according to your reference photo. Some of my whiskers aren't in the correct place according to the reference, but it doesn't really matter. It still makes the portrait look wonderful, and you've got this long fluid line as well. That's all that's important when you're adding your whiskers, is just having that fluid line and making it look as sort of seamless as possible. So that's pretty much it for this wolf tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed this one, and as I said, if you want to follow along in real time, there is the tutorial available on Patreon and my website for you guys, so make sure that you check that out over there and subscribe if you want to get access to all of those tutorials and this one. If you liked this video, then please give it a little thumbs up. It really does help the reach of the channel. And also don't forget to share with all of your arty friends as well. Share with anybody that would be interested in tutorials, anybody that wants to see this lovely wolf come to life. Share it with your friends, give it a thumbs up. Also, if you're new around here and you like this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and make sure that you tick that bell icon as well, because I release tutorial videos and a whole host of other art videos every single week. Tutorial videos are every single Friday, and other art videos are throughout the week as well. Don't forget to follow me on all of my social media sites. I'm on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, and I will see you guys in another tutorial video. Bye!